I am Zrylok, a Zalvanti scholar specializing in interstellar conflict, and today I find myself facing a question I hoped would never be asked. It was a quiet afternoon in the Grand Academy of Galactic Affairs, where the brightest minds from across the known universe gathered to learn the delicate, brutal truths of war. My students, from dozens of species, all aspired to be military strategists, diplomats, and war analysts. Some would go on to serve the Galactic Council, others as advisors to their homeworlds, but all were here for one purpose: to understand war so they might master it. Yet no amount of preparation could have steeled me for the moment Jilkana, a bright young Yelfari, raised one of her tendrils and asked the forbidden question. "Professor Zrylok," she said, her voice carrying the curious tremor of youth, "why are humans banned from participating in interstellar wars?" The room fell into absolute silence. Even the Ultsar, who never ceased their restless clicking, froze in place. The air thickened with tension, and I saw several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. For centuries, the Galactic Council had imposed strict restrictions on discussing the matter, ensuring that young minds were never burdened with the truth. It was a subject buried under layers of bureaucracy, hidden beneath misleading records, and brushed aside with vague warnings. The official explanation was simple. Humans were unpredictable, volatile. Their emotional, irrational nature made them unfit for structured warfare. Some species even believed humanity had never developed proper military doctrine, relying instead on primitive, reactionary aggression. A convenient lie, one that kept the peace. But these students were not fools. They were the best minds their species had to offer, and in their silence I could feel their collective doubt. They had studied the great wars of the galaxy, the conflicts between the Archon Dominion and the Keltari Empire, the brutal campaigns of the Varkesh Swarm, and the countless skirmishes that had shaped our history. And yet, in all recorded wars, there was one glaring absence: humanity. Jilkana's question had exposed the wound in our carefully curated history. I took a slow breath, my elongated fingers tightening against my lectern. I glanced at the security monitor in the corner of the room, knowing full well that any mention of this subject would be flagged. But these students deserved the truth, even if the Galactic Council preferred it buried. I stepped forward, my voice quiet but firm. "Listen well," I said, letting my gaze sweep across the room. "For what I am about to tell you is knowledge that has been deliberately hidden. It is knowledge that many have died to suppress." Some students leaned in, others paled in fear. "Humanity is not banned from war because they are weak," I continued. "They are banned because the last time they fought, they won." The silence deepened, and then I began to tell them the real story. The official records state that humanity's introduction to the Galactic Council was unremarkable. Their homeworld, Earth, was discovered nearly 300 cycles ago, a relatively young species by galactic standards. They had only just begun interstellar travel, using crude propulsion systems and struggling to terraform their neighboring planets. When the Council initiated first contact, they did not find a great empire or a warlike race eager to expand. Instead, they found a divided world, nations fragmented by history, ideologies clashing, a species that seemed perpetually at war with itself. It was an amusing spectacle to many. Species like the Archon Dominion, who had spent millennia refining their war doctrines, scoffed at the primitive conflicts of humanity. Even the bureaucrats of the Council found little to fear. The assessment was clear. Humans were insignificant, their ships were outdated, their weapons unimpressive, and their political structure unstable. They were seen as nothing more than an ambitious but ultimately harmless species, useful for trade and minor diplomatic affairs, but irrelevant in the greater scheme of interstellar power. For a time, this assumption held. Humanity adapted quickly to galactic life, integrating into the wider economy, developing new technologies, and establishing diplomatic ties. They were eager to learn, to explore, and to negotiate. They took pride in their ability to mediate disputes between warring factions. Their diplomats skilled in navigating the complex web of interstellar politics. If anything, they seemed more suited for peace than war. But then, as history has often proven, assumptions can be fatal. The Keltari-Uroth War began, as many conflicts do, over territory, trade disputes, and old grudges that had festered for generations. It was a minor war by galactic standards, one of many fought on the fringes of council space. Billions perished, but to the great empires it was merely another chapter in an endless cycle. The Council, as always, sought to mitigate the damage, sending neutral species to assist in relief efforts, to rebuild what had been lost, and broker peace where possible. Among those sent were humans. It was meant to be a simple assignment. Humans were placed in non-combatant roles: medical aid, logistics, reconstruction. They were not given access to military operations, nor were they expected to intervene in any direct capacity. The Council saw it as a test, a way to gauge humanity's ability to function in a war-torn environment without contributing to the conflict itself. What the Council did not anticipate was humanity's greatest strength. They watched, they learned, and they adapted. Human engineers repaired damaged Keltari ships, analyzing their weaknesses. Their medics treated wounded soldiers, listening to battlefield reports and understanding enemy tactics. Their logistics teams optimized supply lines, exposing inefficiencies that had existed for centuries. Where other species accepted war as an inevitable, rigid construct, humans saw it for what it was: a problem to be solved. And then the first mistake was made. A Keltari commander, desperate and outnumbered, shared battle plans with a human advisor. The war should have continued as it always had, another slow, grinding conflict that would end in stalemate or surrender. Instead, everything changed. At first, no one noticed the difference. The war between the Keltari and the Uroth had been dragging on for years, a brutal, unrelenting conflict like so many before it. The strategies used by both sides were centuries old, refined over generations, but predictable to anyone who had studied galactic warfare. Battles were fought in careful, measured engagements, each species following their own rigid doctrines. Keltari relied on defensive formations, while the Uroth pressed forward with sheer numerical superiority. It was a bloody, grinding war with no clear victor in sight. Then, the humans got involved. Not officially. They were still under strict orders from the Galactic Council to remain neutral. Their role was humanitarian: support the wounded, assist in evacuations, help maintain infrastructure on devastated planets. But humans are not a species that can simply observe. They question, they analyze, they innovate. The first signs of their influence were subtle. Supply chains that had been struggling suddenly ran with impossible efficiency. The Keltari began deploying reinforcements in key locations before the Uroth could even anticipate an attack. Their defensive formations, once predictable, shifted unpredictably, forcing Uroth commanders to adapt to patterns they had never encountered before. Then came the turning point. A single Keltari fleet, outnumbered 50-1, should have been annihilated in a matter of hours. The Uroth fleet had surrounded them, cutting off all avenues of escape, prepared to deliver the final blow. That was how wars in the galaxy worked. Overwhelming force determined victory. Numbers won battles. Superior firepower crushed opposition. The outcome was never in question. And yet, when the dust settled, it was the Uroth fleet that had been obliterated. It took the Council days to process the reports, and when they did, they could not comprehend what had happened. The Keltari ships were not more powerful. They had not received reinforcements. No new superweapon had been introduced. The only difference was a small group of human advisors who had been given access to fleet command. What followed was studied in secret by the Council for years, locked away in classified archives. The humans had restructured the entire Keltauri battle strategy in less than a day. They saw weaknesses the Keltauri had overlooked for generations. They exploited predictable Uroth tactics with an ease that defied logic. Instead of fighting on the enemy's terms, they rewrote the rules of engagement. They lured the Uroth into a kill zone, using their own aggression against them. They manipulated sensor data, making their fleet appear larger than it was. They disabled key supply vessels first, cutting off reinforcements before the battle had even begun. Every decision was calculated, precise, and utterly ruthless. The Uroth fleet had not just been defeated, it had been dismantled. The war should have ended that day. Any other species would have accepted such a catastrophic loss and sought peace. But the Uroth, humiliated, enraged, and desperate for vengeance, declared total war. And humanity, for the first time, was given a reason to fight. The Uroth hegemony was one of the oldest and most feared military powers in the galaxy. Their doctrine was built on one simple principle: overwhelming force. When they declared total war on humanity, the Galactic Council panicked. They pleaded with human representatives to surrender, to offer reparations, to do anything to de-escalate the situation. But humans didn't surrender. The Uroth fleet descended upon the human colonies with the expectation of swift conquest. Their warships darkened the skies of outer human settlements, bombarding worlds into submission. It was a textbook invasion, one they had executed countless times before. Resistance was minimal. Their fleets outgunned humanity's in every possible way. The first 3 planets fell within days, their populations subjugated or eradicated. The Council watched in horror, expecting humanity to plead for intervention. But humanity did not beg. Instead, they vanished. Entire colonies, once filled with millions, went silent. No distress calls, no transmissions, no signs of resistance. Uroth forces moved in to occupy the abandoned worlds, setting up military command centers in what they assumed were conquered territories. Their soldiers celebrated, mocking the cowardice of humanity. Then, one by one, the Uroth occupation forces started to die. At first it was subtle. Communications would cut out unexpectedly. Supply shipments would never arrive. Patrols would go missing, their vehicles found abandoned in the streets. Then came the more disturbing reports. Soldiers disappearing from within secured compounds, their bodies found later, meticulously arranged in ways that sent a clear message: you are not safe here. The Uroth, furious, tightened their control. They increased security, executed suspected resistance fighters, and poured more troops into the occupied worlds. And yet, the disappearances continued. Military bases were infiltrated despite impossible levels of security. Starports were sabotaged. Weapons went missing from armories. Entire battalions were wiped out in the dead of night with no sign of an enemy force. It was not war, it was extermination. The Uroth adapted, deploying stronger garrisons, increasing orbital surveillance, using AI to track human movements. None of it worked. The more they tried to control the situation, the more the resistance escalated. Cities they had conquered became death traps. Buildings rigged with explosives, air filtration systems poisoned, even the very water sources tainted to induce sickness and madness. Then came the psychological warfare. Fake orders were transmitted to Uroth commanders, making them attack their own allies. Fabricated messages convinced entire fleets that their supply lines had been severed, causing them to retreat in chaos. Their war machine, built for brute force, had no answer to the invisible enemy that was slowly bleeding them dry. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the humans went on the offensive. They did not launch grand fleets or massive invasions. Instead, they struck with precision, eliminating leadership, dismantling infrastructure, turning Uroth technology against them. They found weaknesses the Uroth never knew existed. Within 5 cycles, the hegemony collapsed, its proud warriors reduced to terrified fugitives. For the first time in galactic history, a species had not just won a war, they had erased an empire. The Galactic Council did not know how to react. Wars had been fought for millennia, great empires rising and falling, yet never had a conflict ended like this. There was no treaty, no negotiation, no formal surrender. The Uroth hegemony simply ceased to exist. Their fleets abandoned, their worlds silent, their leadership eradicated. The few survivors who remained scattered across the galaxy, broken and directionless, unwilling to even speak of the horrors they had endured. The Council scrambled to make sense of it. They had anticipated the Uroth's defeat, but not like this. Conquering an empire was one thing. Erasing it was another. The sheer efficiency with which humanity had dismantled their enemy defied everything the Council understood about war. In every known conflict, species fought for control, for power, for survival. Victory was achieved through strength, diplomacy, or attrition, but humanity had not fought for any of these things. They had fought to end the fight. This was what made them truly terrifying. The destruction of the Uroth was not an act of vengeance, nor was it conquest. It was a solution. The war had been a problem, and humanity had removed the problem with cold, methodical precision. It was then that the Council understood the truth. Unlike other species who saw war as an inevitable part of existence, humanity did not. To them, war was not an eternal struggle, not a way of life, not a necessary evil. War was a disease, and like any disease, the only logical course of action was to eliminate it completely. This was why they had to be stopped. The Council convened in emergency session, deliberating for weeks over what to do. Some argued that humanity needed to be exterminated before they decided the rest of the galaxy was a problem to be solved. Others proposed strict limitations, containment strategies, or enforced demilitarization. But humanity had already made their decision. They did not demand territory. They did not seize the Uroth's former empire. They did not ask for reparations or tribute. They simply left. The ships they had used to fight the war were decommissioned. The worlds they had taken were abandoned. Humanity returned to its colonies, to its stations, and resumed life as if nothing had happened. It was this, more than anything, that terrified the Council. Empires fought wars for resources, for power, for control, but humanity fought wars to erase them, and if they had done it once, they could do it again. The Council moved swiftly, enacting the highest-level resolution in galactic history, the total prohibition of human involvement in warfare. They were barred from serving in any military, from providing strategic assistance, from intervening in conflicts of any kind. Humanity, once seen as insignificant, had become the one species that the entire galaxy agreed must never be allowed to fight again. For if they ever did, there would be nothing left to stop them. The Galactic Council's decree was absolute. Humanity was forbidden from engaging in war, their military forces dissolved, their strategic doctrines sealed away in classified archives. Treaties were signed, agreements made, and laws passed to ensure they would never again be a part of interstellar conflict. But fear is a difficult thing to control. Despite their official stance, the great empires of the galaxy could not ignore what had happened. Intelligence agencies devoted entire divisions to monitoring human activity. Political analysts debated the implications of their existence in secret. Even the most war-hardened species whispered warnings to their soldiers, "Never provoke the humans." Yet for all the fear and speculation, humanity remained indifferent. They obeyed the decree without resistance. Their fleets were repurposed for exploration. Their military academies shifted focus to diplomacy and engineering. They integrated peacefully, traded freely, and engaged in galactic politics with an almost unsettling ease. It was as if the war with the Urath had never happened. And that, more than anything, made the other species nervous. There were those who argued that humanity had been humbled, that they had learned their place in the grand order of the galaxy. But the wiser minds knew better. Humanity had not stopped because they were afraid. They had stopped because they chose to. The distinction was critical. The galaxy had forced peace upon them, but no one truly believed that peace had been necessary. Humanity did not need war to thrive, nor did they seem to crave it. But if they ever wanted to fight again, the Council worked tirelessly to ensure that day would never come. Human diplomats were courted, their leaders appeased, trade agreements favored them, technological exchanges were generously approved. Every empire, every species, every major power made certain that humanity had no reason to view them as a threat. Even still, the paranoia persisted. What if something changed? What if humanity one day decided that another war was necessary? The very idea was unthinkable. The galaxy had seen what happened when humanity fought an enemy in self-defense. No one dared to imagine what they might do if they fought with intent. To this day, no official record of the Urath War remains in public archives. The younger generations of the galaxy do not learn about it in their history lessons. When asked, the Council gives only vague explanations. The war ended, and the Urath faded into obscurity. No one speaks of how or why or who was responsible. Humanity, for their part, does not press the matter. They do not tell the story of what they did. They do not celebrate their victory. They simply move forward, content to leave the past buried. But the rest of the galaxy does not forget. They cannot forget. And so, the great powers watch, hoping that humanity never finds a reason to break their silence. Because if they do, the galaxy knows one unshakable truth. It will be the last war anyone ever fights.